I'm Jay Rao. Our guest today is the guru of Florida high school football. For more than 50 years, he's covered the sport as a writer, a broadcaster, a talent scout. And when college coaches and recruiters come down to South Florida, they ask him who are the players and teams to watch. Welcome to the show, our guest, Larry Blustein. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate you guys having us. And yeah, you know me, I've never been into like promoting me, so, right. Yeah, thank you for having us.
You've been involved in high school football for over 50 years. How did you get started, and where did that passion for high school football come from?
Yeah, this is all my dad. My dad played professional baseball back in the day. And then, his father was a little bit more strict and said, you can't keep, doing this at a young age and signing contracts. And so he actually threw him in the Army. But it worked out real good for my dad. My dad became well-rounded. He had a passion, and he's the guy. He took me to everything, baseball. He had season tickets to the University of Miami. They came here in the 40s. In the early 50s, he started having season tickets to the University of Miami, watched them, anything and everything. He's a big Boston Red Sox, came from Boston, but he was so knowledgeable about it. He's the one that conditioned me to read the sports page, and that's crazy. And, right. He's the guy. He's the guy that took me to all the big games, the Carroll Gables and Miami High games in the Orange Bowl. And we went over to see John Reeves play in Tampa Robinson against Gables back in the day. So I remember a lot of those games, because him and wrestling matches. My dad was huge into high school wrestling, and that's why I'm going on my 35th year as the voice of the state wrestling tournament here in Florida, because it was just a passion. I've loved it from the beginning. I saw how hard you have to work, and the dudes like Ray Lewis and Eric Rad, who were state champion guys, and so I love that sport, and baseball is my favorite. I mean, I know football is something that I've done and I love, and I work hard at it. Baseball, for some reason, Jay, it just came so natural where I would pick up minor league rosters and be able to recite everybody in the Southern League and in the Florida State League, and just tell you where they were. With me, when someone mentions a name, like a Deion Sanders, and I'll say Southside Park, Fort Myers, or I'll skip all the things that he did at FSU and in the NFL and tell you where he began, and that came, oddly enough, for watching a Dallas Cowboy game when Howard Cosell had said, Rodrigo Barnes, what a talent he is, out of Rice University. Houston Wheatley is where he started. And that kind of got me thinking, wow, this dude, how the hell did he know that? So that's what my passion was, to start these guys out from youth league, and Dalvin Cooks, Scott Lakes, and things like that. And you remember baseball too. But baseball was my passion. Football, we lived in the hotbed for football.
You mentioned that you went to a lot of baseball and football games at Miami Stadium and the Orange Bowl growing up with your dad. What are some of since we have an Orange Bowl page, what are some of your earliest memories of the Orange Bowl, specifically also the high school games in particular?
Well, the high school games were everything. The 65 game with the Miami High and Gables, where they were 1-2 in the country. And I still remember my dad, I said, it was they used to start at 8:00.
Right.
I think until the 1980, they were starting at 8:00 for some reason, but it started at 8, and we're here was 7:20, and we haven't even left our house. And I said, "Hey, Dad, I think it's going to be a bigger game." I still remember saying that, and I'll tell you what, we parked across the river, and that's how many fans they had. 50,000, and they sold out of hot dogs before the game started. It was the most intense atmosphere because I never expected it. And that was my exposure to high school football. Really. I mean, I had been to games. I remember we went down to see Key West play Southwest Miami back in 1962. I still remember that. Mm-hmm. For some crazy reason, we would go to these games. My dad would go to a lot of Gables games, he followed all the guys that you talk about, that. And remember, Gables played all their games in the OB. So everything was, exciting back then. And, and the things that you put up, I always go, wow, I remember that, and I remember, yeah. So the Orange Bowl, especially, that was one. And actually the second memory was the Notre Dame Miami game that got such an electric buildup. They had no press seating left in the press box, and we were on the first row of the end zone where the opening kickoff and Rocket didn't take it out, and everyone was going crazy. And that was, to me, that was the most intense game that I can remember. And then the third one was being a young kid, but the stories that we had, we used to go to all the Orange Bowl practices when Nebraska or Notre Dame or Alabama or anybody came in, and we would go because you could. Nobody understands, but back then, there's no gate, no guards, no one saying. So we went to everything. My family and my friend Bob and I, when we got a little bit older, and we got a chance to see the 1971 Nebraska LSU game. We spent all week with them, so we knew both teams, and we went to the game. We were sitting like 10 rows up, and that's a game that Jerry Taggy scored the touchdown right on the goal line, and we were right there. So those are pretty memorable times of that from college standpoint. High school, there's so many. One of my best friends, Greg Stead, growing up, opening kickoff of the whole season, got paralyzed. A stud of studs. This kid would have been in the NFL. He was just such a beast when he was younger and everything. Opening freaking kickoff, Orange Bowl, in the Orange Bowl. Eddie played for Edison, and he got paralyzed. So, I mean, you think of those times. You think of the Rolling Stones concert that I saw there. And working for at Miami Stadium, anything that happened at any of the stadiums, I could go to. So I went to billions of concerts. We just hung out, and Sonny Herschel, may he rest in peace, a guy who got me just totally started in this business. He and I were walking in the outfield for weeks to come and watching all the pot plants grow at Miami Stadium outfield. So it was a lot of fun, doing at both places, and Miami Stadium, especially being a PA announcer or working as and getting an opportunity to see the Cal Ripken juniors before they were anything, and watching his father manage, and the great Bill DeMars, who was with the Philly organization, and you got a chance to see all those things. And I do remember the Ferguson Jenkins and coming over to my parents' house for dinner along with Pat Williams, who the Orlando Magic. Okay. He was a catcher on that team, and Alex Johnson. And back in those days, having black people in white neighborhoods, even in the early 60s, wasn't popular. But my parents went against the grain, and I remember them. They had 2:00 afternoon games on Sundays, and as soon as the games were over, my parents would take them to the house and give them a home cooked meal. Yeah, it was good when they were in town. And those are the first three guys. And I keep saying to myself, if I only had a camera, those things. My dad took pictures, but we haven't been able to locate them. But yeah, those type of times. And and sitting right next to rookie Terry Bradshaw on his bed when the Dolphins were getting ready to play the Steelers the next day, and we went to the hotel and nobody stopped us. We went upstairs, and those are the times I grew up in, and that's how I appreciated sports a lot more of all types, but football, baseball leading the way.
Now, back in the old days, even before the time you started covering high school football, 3 city schools used to play their home games in the Orange Bowl: Miami High, Edison, and Jackson. And Coral Gables would sometimes also play a lot of games there. Yeah. How has the game changed from that time? For example, these schools used to dress up like 100 players.
Yeah.
And somebody used to tell me that when Miami High would come out of the tunnel, they looked like an army ants.
Because they had those midnight blue helmets. Blue. I remember. I'll tell you what, you always wanted to be one of those two schools. Your Gables, really. Edison back then, I was telling you, you talk about some of the guys that they had back in the early 70s. They were Jackson, even before the Walker brothers, even, when Schubert was a kicker and he went to Pitt. And they had, those games are great, but you got to understand too, there was Thursday night games too back then where you didn't have that many. You'd have great teams, Southwest would play against Gables on a Thursday night only because someone else, maybe that Miami High had a big game coming up the next night.
Right.
So, and they couldn't play on Saturdays, and some Fridays they couldn't play because University of Miami was home, and they played all their games at home on Friday night. So, and that was an unusual growing up in the Orange Bowl because you would have to go, on a Friday night to watch them play Georgia or watch them, play any of those USC. We were there the night USC was number 5 in the nation, and Miami beat them 10-7. And the night that Roosevelt leaks and Texas came in here in 73 with Marty Akins and all those studs. Number 2 in the nation, Miami knocked them off.
Right.
Woody Thompson scored 3 touchdowns that night. I still, you remember because those there was 22,000 fans in there, but you as a kid are not focusing on the fans so much. You're focusing in on the athletes.
Right. And you mentioned earlier about how it was kind of taboo back in the 60s for blacks and whites to intertwine. It was a town, it was a segregation back in the old days. And back in the 60s, the black schools like Northwestern, Booker T, North Dade, Mays, and Carver, they would play a lot of their games at Miami Stadium. Did you cover those games?
Well, I didn't cover them, but we went to see them because my dad was in the refrigeration and air conditioning business, and his clients were a lot of these people that had kids that play. So he found out all about all these games, and we would show up being maybe, other than maybe a statistician, we'd be the only white people in the whole Miami Stadium, but they were in the morning.
Right.
And because they didn't want to conflict with any of the college games, they played them Saturday mornings, and Friday nights would be tough because you didn't want to draw your attention, because that area was still pretty white around Allapattah. Back then. So they were fun. They were great. They were great athletes. But you can't. It's sort of like what I do is when people ask me, they'll say, "Who was the greatest of all time?" Well, I'll say, like Frank Gore was the greatest of his generation.
Right.
I said, there's other guys. The way I feel about Rufus Ferguson, I've told you, that just a
the Roadrunner.
Yeah, just a man amongst boys. So. Jay, that's where I think I can't, and I still try to preach to a lot of those kids when they are the coaches. I'll say we got the best guy ever. I said, well, maybe the best guy now, but you got to understand, you guys didn't live all those years ago, and you didn't. There were some pretty darn good kids because remember they had a lot of talent, but there weren't anywhere near as many schools and charter schools and private schools. Nobody went to Dade Christian. Nobody went to Miami Country Day to play football back in the day. Now they all do.
Right.
See, that's just the way it is. Those schools are pumping a little bit, like Westminster should always be on the rise. Good coach. It's just tough to battle down in Southwest Miami for talent because Columbus is pretty much going to win out in the private schools. And then public schools, you got all those. Palmetto has come up, which is now Killian has gotten a whole influx. And this year it's going to be 5A is going to be crazy just to get out of this area. Because Central is going to be national good. And then you have American Heritage is going to be national good. So you got them and Central and Killian all in the same region. So somebody doesn't even get past the second round, which is not right.
Now, as you just mentioned, by the 1970s, more schools opened.
Yes.
So that means fewer games at the Orange Bowl. Yes. Now you have these new municipal stadiums like at Miami-Dade North, Tamiami Stadium.
Right.
There was a
Central Stadium, which was Carl Gables' home.
North Miami Stadium.
Yeah, North Miami they all came on. They used Curtis Park a lot back in the day. But the only real stadiums is you had the private schools like Day Christian, all those had their own fields, but yet in Tropical Park was a horse track. Right. So they didn't come, for years after that. So back in the 60s, you pretty much had to use Central Stadium. You had to use Tamiami, as you said, and then the Orange Bowl. And then when the Orange Bowl became costly, remember, you see, right now people can't use FIU because it's too costly. And, the only ones that could afford are Berlin and Columbus. And even then they get torn up. So there's even today, there's a serious shortage of fields, and more so now because there's more schools. But back in the day, you had limited places to play. A couple of schools like Coral Park would play at home.
Mhm.
you know, because they play afternoon games, you know, because they just too expensive then, too expensive now. But there was, but in the 60s also, if you look too, a lot of those marquee games, they have them on Thursday night. They have to go against the Hurricanes on a Friday night. Some of their better games. They wouldn't play Saturdays back then like they do now.
I mean, when I moved to South Florida from Illinois in 1986, one of the first things that I noticed is that the public schools in Dade County, on the most part, do not have their own high school football stadiums.
Nobody did.
So they would play at these municipal stadiums that we were just talking about. Whereas if you go to other places around the state, even in Broward County, you see a lot of they have their own stadium.
Yeah.
Why is that Dade County public schools don't have their own stadiums, except for maybe Southridge now?
Well, Southridge has it
Yeah.
because it was built in, and Morning has it because it's North Miami Stadium. It's just right across their parking lot, so they can. But nobody else does, and they never really. I think the county just didn't think that it would be good. And then the other thing is a lot of these communities like Southwest and such, they were already built in. So if you put lights there, you'd have to get the whole community association to approve. You know, like Cardinal Gibbons had to do, Miami Bill and Jesuit had to do it to add lights. But public schools back then were so. You look, Gables, you couldn't have put. You know, where they are, they got, you know, the people pay good money to live, you know, in that area. You know, it's a good area. So yeah, they never did because they just, and then everybody goes, well, like when Braddock could have easily, because they had nowhere near anything near it when they first opened. South Miami, the same thing, you know, so you know that. I mean, when they first opened, I mean, there was a little cluster, as you said. You had South Miami, you had North Miami Beach, and Southridge all open at the same time in Miami Lakes. And then you had American, and then you had South. There was one other school that when American opened down, because you could see Sunset. They're all different. They're all the same type of schools. Like North Miami Beach and Southridge are almost like the same type of schools. So they added them, and that was all 1970 on. But before then, it was just a whole different ballgame. I mean, you know, Gable, all those. See, that's where the inner city schools started losing out. When a lot of those quote unquote suburb schools started getting built, like Miami Lakes back then was a suburb. Now it's right in the middle of everything. So when HML was built, you're saying, wow, that's really far out. Well, we didn't know that Goldman would even be further out, you know, or Westland Hialeah would be even further out. So yeah, you didn't foresee that, you know. We didn't. I mean, as kids, you don't. Maybe the parents did. Carroll City when we were growing up was a whole different area it is now. I mean, the athletes that they had, you know, like Mike Atkinson, who pitched with the Orioles and those type of guys. It was a different group than it is now. And we kind of kidded when Buckshot Calvert quarterbacked them a couple of years ago.
The Carroll City kid.
Yeah. We said he was the first white quarterback since Jody Boudreau in 1970. And that was Jody is
wasn't he from Broward County though?
No, Jody lived in
Calvert. I think.
He should have been gone to South Plantation. He repented for 4 years. He went to Liberty University, so he had a great career. He ended up as the all-time leading passer in Liberty University history, and pretty good. You know, Turner Gill was his coach, and you know, Freeze,
Nebraska quarterback.
Yeah. Freeze is the coach there now, who used to be at Mississippi.
Okay, Hugh Freeze, right?
Hugh Freeze. Okay. So yeah, Liberty. I think what happens is if you do wrong, you have to go to Liberty to kind of repent for 4 years. And remember Sam Rutigliano? He was the guy.
I remember Antoine Childs. From, Cardinal Gibbons. I think.
Gibbons. Yeah. He was pretty good, and Eric, big tight end. Eric Green
played for the Dolphins.
Exactly. Yeah. And he went to Pitt, but Pittsburgh. He went to Steelers, I believe.
Oh, okay.
But he came out of Liberty. So Liberty had some guys. Sid Bream. Baseball player. That's brother-in-law to Shannon Bream from Fox. So yeah. No, but Sid Bream was great. He was Dodgers, but he came out of Liberty. Yeah, so that's a good thing because the last couple of years, Liberty has come into South Florida and they've come away with some some kids where they never would have in the past.
Right. Well, let's talk a little recruiting
Okay.
as far as recruiting history. Now, Howard Schnellenberger, it looked like, was the first real coach to really figure out that you win with South Florida talent if you can get the best players in South Florida, and he created his own little state of Miami. If you get the best players from Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and that I-4 corridor, you could win national championships, and it proved to be right.
Yeah.
What makes South Florida talent so unique compared to players from the rest of the state and the rest of the country?
Well, there's a tradition that continues and people stay here, like the Davis brothers and everybody, they kind of stay here and their kids grow up here. So you have that same, and you know how it was built back in the war days where people were down here from all over the country and decided to stay and go to Miami High. And that's why Miami High, you know, had all these guys who were Purple Heart winners and all that, because they had an influx of people from all over. Now you have this lineage that's here where maybe dad and mom didn't grow up here, but grandpa grew up in California or whatever. So you have all that talent, and it kept going and going. The coaching's really good, but underpaid. And the core of coaches that are down here have to work other jobs just to make it go, because they just can't raise a family on what they're paying them. They don't pay them anything for coaching. I think it's a travesty, but I've said it over and over again. And there are people fighting, like Luther Campbell and Dr. Gallen. No, they're fighting, you know, to get the, you know, Luther doesn't need, you know, he does well financially, so he doesn't need the money that you get from that. So yeah. So to answer your question, year after year, they kept just getting talent. Kids stayed here. The weather 365 was great. You could work out anytime. You know, you call a friend up in New York in January and tell them that you're out in shorts and sweating outside, and see, it's a whole different environment, and people like that. And more people found out about it, and you started getting people coming in, like NFL fathers, the Boses, the Brzezinskis, those type of people staying in the area too. And it happens everywhere else, but you're more inclined to stay like Tampa, Miami, Jacksonville than you would, let's say, Charlotte or Minnesota. So from a standpoint of just being year-round weather, you grew up in Minnesota, you're tired of it now, you're here and your kids are growing. And, you know, that's how you look at Chris Carter. So his kid, Duran, played here. And so, you know, that's how it happens.
Now, you touched on it a little bit earlier about the Bozas and the Carters and everything. I've noticed that a lot of former Miami Dolphins are now coaching high school football, particularly in Broward County. I noticed what Patrick Surtain is doing at American Heritage.
Unbelievable.
Jason Taylor's on the staff over at St. Thomas Aquinas.
Crazy good coach.
It has Broward County caught up to Dade County in terms of talent. I see 7 players drafted from American Heritage. Is that just one school, or is Broward County actually legitimately caught up to Dade County in talent?
Well, you have St. Thomas too, who leads the way. So they, they have. You know, I mean, you look at a program like Chaminade, and they've got a lot of Dade County kids on it. So, I mean, you got to factor in that. Dade's still king. I mean, it'll be tough to, you know, mention the best teams in the country without uttering Central and Northwestern, because they are year after year after year. But then you have those teams that are pushing in there, like Columbus. They're pushing into to be one of those elite teams. You know, Booker T's just such a small area. And if you don't do well with the kids that are coming in from the Optimist program that year, you're just not going to do very well. Recruiting there is really tough. People could take your kids, but you getting kids to go to Overtown is not, you know, what everybody wants to hear. So they'll probably, you know, especially being in 4A and having a powerhouse like Gibbons. I mean, there's one of the programs right there. I think they've joined Heritage. They've joined St. Thomas. They've joined Central Northwestern as being an elite team. They've won state 2 out of the last 3 years. They're loaded up front. They're putting a lot of kids into the next level, and they beat St. Thomas, which is, to me, that's something that you hold that flag up as high as you can when trying to get kids over to your school.
Talk about how recruiting has changed over the years. For example, transfers have always been going on forever. I mean, you can go back into the 50s and players transferred,
Forever.
but today it seems like kids go through 2, 3, 4 schools during
without playing a game. What they'll do is they'll
Yeah.
transfer, Jay.
Mhm.
No, I have a lot of this. In fact, I keep track of all the transfers. 242 as of from December, when December ended to now.
Mhm.
242 kids in Dayton Broward have transferred schools.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. There's a couple of them
Mhm.
that have transferred to school, not played it down, and then transferred again. So to me, if you're a college coach looking at that, you may not be looking to get a kid like that because of the fact that, look, he's transferred 3 times already. I don't want him, if I tell him you're running the wrong pattern, you're going to sit your butt on the bench. I don't want him picking up and leaving just because he's got, somebody of authority in his face. Yeah, that's discipline has been lost.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, and it makes me wonder, maybe the reason that a lot of kids transfer is that they want to get more exposure going to like a super team, like a St. Thomas or an American Heritage, or maybe a Northwestern or a Booker T.
Okay.
But in your opinion, because we have YouTube, because we have film readily available to anybody, anywhere, is it now more harder to? It's now easier to find an under the radar recruit. I mean, if you play for Coral Park and you're a really good player at Coral Park, do you really need to transfer to Columbus to get more visibility nowadays?
They do.
Yeah.
Roberts,
Mhm.
who's at Miami now, went to Columbus. He was 3 years a
Right.
4.0 student at Coral Park. It's just that he felt that going to Columbus, which was basically down the street, it would be better for him, because of the fact that he'll get more exposure because he's already gotten it done in the classroom. It happens. Unfortunately, it happened. T-Rob went to Coral Park, so,
Right.
he came out pretty good. So, no, I understand what you're saying, but things are so different now. You have so many people involved in the process. You have these fans that are, hanger-oners,
Right.
and they want to get involved and tell all the college. And, sometimes it interferes with the process. It really does. I mean, let the people who are seeing these guys send them to the colleges. Don't be trying to, then you have too many people doing it. I mean,
Right.
the poor kid is just, he's swimming. He doesn't know what to do. He's listening to everybody. I'll help you. No. And I'll tell you, and I'll tell these people out there,
Right.
the very fact is that nobody can get you a scholarship but you. That's it. Nobody's
Right.
going to get you. Jay, you're not going to give me a scholarship. I have to get it myself. And,
Right.
You could tell somebody about me and have me watch, like at the Butch Davis camp.
Right.
We were there, and Coach, could you watch that kid? Butch is going, okay, yeah, and he'll look over there, and if he sees something, he'll tell one of his coaches.
Mhm.
But on the most part, that's what those things are about. It's been a real tough 15 months for these kids.
Right.
So right now is just a tough time. All things have changed in recruiting for this cycle because of the fact that college coaches hadn't been able to see these kids.
Mhm.
They haven't seen them at all on their campus or play
Right.
in live. They got a chance to see them at their for 26 days this summer, which was really good.
Right.
But it's to answer your question, it has changed in a great way since I started and had to use payphones, and I used to have a bag full of change to call and typewriter with white out and everything. You got to remember that I had to go and see. That's why I go and see now. Like a lot of people would prefer to just stay home and watch video clips and judge kids like that. You'd be surprised. But I learned how to go and see, and you have to. Driving up to Gainesville in 1975 to see if a kid was going to commit instead of just texting them, or because they wouldn't answer the phones, and it would cost me all this money. And if they didn't answer, I'd be wasting change. So, yeah, when you get there and you finally see them at a practice, and I drove back. I have done that. I can't even tell you. I've driven to Tallahassee to see a kid and driven back that same day.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, how many games would you say over the course of one season?
Parts of 100 games, I say. Wow. Parts of 100. And living in South Florida has made it dictated because I'll go to like now because I'm doing the whole state again. I hadn't done the whole state for 10 years. Now I'm back the last couple of years doing it. So I've been everywhere from Pensacola on. That's why when you asked me about doing the show, I said, I got to see where I am, and this week, thank goodness I'm not, but a couple of weeks, I'm going to be heading up to Jacksonville for a week. I see parts of 100 games because I'll see 2 games on a Thursday in the afternoon, go from like Mylander and Loud is good because they're having double headers. So I get a chance to see the kids. I don't care about games. Like people go, you're leaving? I said, yeah, I don't care about who wins. It's not unless North Miami and they don't win. So, so that's what I do. And I'll put together like 20 games. Let's say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 8, 9, 10 games a week. And over a course of a season, give or take a couple, I'll get about 100 live games in, which is perfect for me. I've got stack of rosters I keep. And I remember, I just check off during a game. I'll take a picture with my phone and that's it. That's how and I'll get back and then I'll have everything up here. I know what the kid did and I'll come back or, I'll just I'll just dictate something to myself to send and, what I saw and it's fresh in my memory. I don't if I see something on a kid, I can't just change it because someone said, oh, he's not being recruited. I said, well, he should be, I can't, people are missing it, especially now. No one really seen a lot of these kids. And when the colleges last got a chance to see these kids, they were 5'9", 190. Well, now they're 6'1", 210, 220. And they go, oh, okay, different animal. So people think recruiting is really cut and dry. It's not so easy. There's so many facets of it. And, when I hear people go, I never listen to what people say. I'll hear their input, but I have my eyes and I know what I trust. Like if somebody goes, oh man, he doesn't usually drop the ball 4 times in a row. He did. That's you don't get those chances. In this day and age, you don't get that many chances. Quick story, Coach O'Leary up at UCF, Travis Benjamin. Glade Central was up there. They're 7-on-7, and one of the coaches kept nudging O'Leary to look. He goes, this kid can run a 4.1, I swear. He does a little curl, boom, bounces off his chest. O'Leary turns around. So all of a sudden, then he goes, Coach, look, he's wide open, He looks at it, he got it in his hands and dropped it.
Oh, wow.
O'Leary never looked at Travis Benjamin again. But we all know where Travis Benjamin ended up in the NFL, had a really nice career. You don't always get those chances. You don't get those chances. And that's what I'm saying. When a college coach a head coach is giving you his attention for 2 plays and you screw up.
Now you've been involved in recruiting for a long, long time, and you've dealt with a lot of different college coaches, both head coaches and assistant coaches. Who are the best recruiters when it comes to selling a program, in your opinion? Who are some of the best ones in terms of recruiting that you've dealt with?
Whether they're head coaches now or not. Before, Jimbo Fisher, without a doubt. When Jimbo was in college, he would spend an hour on the phone with me every week, picking everybody especially when he was at LSU, because that was where he was on his climb, and he wanted to make sure. He goes, talk to me more about Tavares Gooden. We need to recruit him. Those type of things. And he was definitely one of them. I would have to say that. I'll tell you, the other one was Pete Carroll, without a doubt.
Oh, wow, really? Okay.
Yeah. Pete Carroll could. Think about what Pete Carroll. We went to Texas and saw this kid, Lachey Seastrunk. He was a running back. He ended up going to Oregon. Okay. And we met his mom. And I said, so what's been great about the process of recruiting? She goes, ooh, man, having Pete Carroll in my house. And I'm saying he appeals to everybody, the moms, and everybody. And he gets in there, and I'm telling you, he tells Matt Leinert's mom, hey, he needs to be over at SC. He's there. And I think those 2 guys stick out as far. And I'll tell you another guy back in the day, is way before, but you had mentioned him in one of yours, is Don James.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you, one of my first assignments when I was younger it was WKAT radio. And it was to go over to the North-South All-Star game, and he was the head coach from
Kent State, or was it Washington?
Washington at the time, and that was the one where Harmon was in, and that was
Mark Harmon, the actor.
Mark Harmon, Mark Harmon,
NCIS.
yeah. So, and I'll tell you what, my mom had to bring me down, and I'll tell you, he sat in that interview room and charmed my mom for like an hour, and you could just tell his demeanor and how sincere he was about talking about his program and the kids, and because he had a couple of kids on the team with him from there. I think Robin Earl was one of them, the guy for Chicago Bear too, fullback at Chicago Bear. Yeah. He was a tight end at Washington and became a fullback in the NFL with the Bears. And so it's those guys, you remember those, but I've sat in a lot of offices of high school coaches when college coaches have been in there and seen things that if I wrote a book, there'd be a lot of lives ruined, so it's been pretty crazy. And but you know what, I just, at first it was shocking and I go, man, but I just felt it was the norm. Everybody was doing it until they get caught, and I wasn't blowing the whistle on anybody because I don't need to do that. Why should I ruin my, somebody else's life, especially now? Why people go, you should do a tell-all. Why would you do that? That's, let it go. Those people, I'm sure they'll get karma some way in their lives. So,
well, a couple of names that I always keep hearing when it comes to recruiting in South Florida over the years was Doc Holliday from West Virginia, who's now at Marshall.
Yeah,
and Butch Davis was another one.
Butch. Well, Butch has always been good because of his status. Being a defensive coordinator for Super Bowl champions and being around the guys. So he's always had that little stigma. But he, Doc Holliday, how Doc Holiday's pretty slick. He does that 3-card money thing.
Right.
No, he had a great career, at what he did. And, those guys were always, look at Urban Meyer. He's another guy, especially when he was at Ohio State. He happened to come down to do a camp and he goes, I'm going to bring Chris Carter down. I'm going to bring Joey Bosa down, guy that he's surrounding himself with guys that are going to make him look good. So, and look at where he is. He's pretty much, when people could dictate, like Nick Saban, anything they want to do in life.
The helicopter, when the helicopter comes.
Yeah, that's true. The helicopter comes. Watch out, man. That's for sure. The boosters aren't far behind, I'm sure.
Right. Now, you do more than just high school football. You also are the announcer at the state wrestling tournament. How'd you get involved with that?
I never really wanted. I've always loved wrestling. I've done it. I think we went to almost every state championship, and we saw Lester Williams. We saw some of the greats wrestle. But I sat there during the state championships in 1987. It was at the Lakeland Civic Center at the time, and by the time the guy who was announcing introduced the lineups, I wrote 4 stories. I swear to you. It took forever. So I went up, a friend of mine at North Miami Beach, who at the time they were state champions. And I says, hey, how can I get a gig like this? That I can announce their names and speed up this process. A week after that, I got a call from the guy who was going to be running the tournament the next year in West Palm. How convenient. So wasn't far. I did it first year. The guy said, hey, can you do it next? Then they moved it to the Bayfront Center in St. Pete, and then to the Lakeland Center for 20 or 19 years. And I just stayed with him. Now it's at the Silver Spurs Arena in Kissimmee, which is one of the best because there's no block sight lines. You're right in the middle of the action. And that's how I got involved in it. And I've even had an opportunity once to be flown to Seattle, Washington for the Nationals to be a part of 3 people that are announcing. So I went to that. Then I went to Albany, New York, University of Albany, and they had a tournament there that drew a field from Russia, all these countries.
Right.
And I got to do that. The name pronunciations were pretty crazy. So that's it. And that's how I got involved. I love it. I do it. I don't do as many tournaments. I used to do a lot of local, I used to do GMAC, BCAA, but I don't have time to do it anymore. and now I just do state. But I enjoy it. I block out that 3 days. What I do is I'll go up and see some football early in the week at some schools, because back then they're conditioning. So I'll get a chance to see, like this past year, I went to Mount Dora and all those schools up there. Just, you see, nobody will ever go up there, Jay. You know, I mean, only me. It goes to Eustis and Mount Dora and all those. Popka. Well, Popka they go to because of the talent. But I went up there, and then I went to the state wrestling tournament, and try to do different things, combining a little vacation time, which I don't get much of. And my wife is always busy, so she doesn't, notice that I'm gone 24 hours a day. So, but it's been really good. It's because I've been able to balance a bunch of different things and make this happen. The average person couldn't just afford to do recruiting because it really doesn't pay much. So.
Okay, I got a couple more questions.
Sure.
And they're probably questions that you've probably been asked 1,000 times, but I got to ask you, who's the best player you ever saw play at the high school level?
Herschel Walker.
Wow.
Went to see them play his senior year. They played against Noonan, 285 on 14 carries. Just, he looked like a truck, like in all these little ants trying to hold on to the truck. What a phenomenal athlete. Mm-hmm. And that day I had watched his sister win a track meet, and she was blazing fast. She was like, one of the fastest, but without a doubt. But if Florida wise, the best that I ever saw, I'd have to say Adrian McPherson, because I thought
really?
He was
from Bradenton,
Southeast.
Okay,
interesting. He went to FSU, did a great job, really good. He was just so dominant. He could do whatever he wanted when he wanted, and I still remain close with him. That's the good thing. All these guys that I've covered, from Michael Irvin, I've see Mike, talk to Mike a lot, and Tony Sands, who, Tony Sands was he's
Tuxedo,
Kansas. And Tony was just, but to be honest with you, Herschel Walker, really by far, I mean, just, I've never seen anybody like that.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen anybody like that. He was just somebody that big and that fast. And he just run away from you.
Now, my final question, this is kind of a tough question, maybe not the easiest question to answer, but we have a lot of University of Miami fans, obviously, on our page for the Go See Orange Bowl. What, in your opinion, do you think needs to be done to get Miami back to contending for national championships, or winning 10 games consistently or more on a regular basis? Okay,
they went step one last year and got a top 10 class. Mm-hmm. They got to repeat it now, and then one more time. 3 classes like that. And right now they're in the midst. They just picked up a big time offensive lineman, so they have 4 commits now, and they're all 4 type stars. That's what you need to do. Right. I'm not necessarily a believer in you got to get everybody in South Florida, because if you do, you would have gotten Steve Hutchinson, you would have got Derek Thomas, you would have got all those Marvin Jones, you would have gotten people leave, but get some of like what they got last year in James Williams. They normally don't get those type of guys. Alabama usually gets him. Same thing with the defensive tackle out of Palmetto. You don't normally get a guy like that. Leonard Taylor. Alabama gets those guys. So Miami got that type of class. 2 more classes like last year, and they're in the business. But Miami fans also have to understand that while you're recruiting, so is everybody else in the ACC. That's how North Carolina, people fell asleep on North Carolina. They're getting some 90-year-old guy to come back and coach. Well, that 90-year-old guy's got a whole base
Mac
of
Brown.
He's got a whole base of people that he knows. And then, for them to get one of the top quarterbacks and wrestle him away from FSU at the time, and he's turned out to be a good one. So you gotta be mindful of what you do, not so much what Virginia. And the most misleading thing from Miami's defense going into this year is they were just voted as the number 1 defensive secondary in the ACC. But linebackers and defensive front, they're nowhere near the top. They can't be, because they only have one guy coming back, the kid Corey Flagg, who has any real, because so far Sam Brooks hasn't worked out. Love the guy, but hasn't worked out. They gotta make these people work out. And then all of a sudden you get Jalen Phillips, who goes with the Dolphins, so he's gone. Right. Quincy Roche's gone, and then you had Rousseau the year before. You have Nesta Silvera in the middle, but is that going to be enough? just when people keep saying, "Oh, they're going to kill Alabama," no, they're not. It just the whole thing. You got to be a realist. You know, in this world, you got to be a realist. What makes you think that Alabama's not going to do what they've done for the last 15, 20 years? Just decimate whoever's in their way. Right. It's just you got to remember the second and third teamers have played more physical minutes over the last year than all those draft choices because they were out of the game when it was 38-0 or 45-0. So these guys get some, and you got a Bryce Young who's a beast, and everybody, after McElroy, they'll never find a guy like that. Tua, they'll never find a guy. Mac Jones, they'll never find, you see, the beat goes on, and their running game is crazy. Their secondary is going to be crazy.
I think their entire secondary is from South Florida too.
Well, yeah, and Pat left, so Pat's a draft pitch. But you still do. You got Battle, who's going to be a beast in there, and the kid Job from Columbus. So they got dudes, and then you got Major Wright's brother still there. Right. So but after that, if Miami can continue to do what they've done, and I think they will. I think they'll get some really good recruits. They'll close really fast, and they'll be good. So there's some good news. Miami over the next couple of years, but don't look for it to happen in game one because you're going to be disappointed. I mean, there's no sign that says that Miami's going to be that type of team, but be aware of Michigan State. You got to be aware of those teams. Remember, you're in the ACC where everybody is playing for that number 2 spot behind Clemson. So, actually number 3. So, because I think North Carolina, even though they lost the 2 backs, still have enough in the tank. So. That's your hurricane minute.
Well, thank you so much, Larry.
Anytime, brother.
Plethora of information. Awesome guest.
Thank you. Likewise.
I'm Jay Rao for the Ghost of the Orange Bowl, and we'll see you again soon.